and away we go with a shot of espresso. It's showtime!
And good Tuesday morning again, everyone. This is Tuesday, the 8th of April, 2025. Welcome into the third hour of the Awake Nation, your morning wake-up call that brings you the truth with a shot of espresso. I'm David Zubelik.
And I'm Penny Ellie Shepherd.
All right. And now, going to bring in our very first guest, Jesse Beltran of Mind Metric Live. Good morning, Jesse.
Good morning, Dave and Penny. How are my two favorite people this morning?
Well, we're doing good. How are you?
Favorite person?
There must be synchronicity in the air because Penny, you had no idea what I was going to talk about this morning. But your last segment there on that article about bringing all these things, extinct animals, back ties right in with the video that I created specifically for this morning. And I don't know, David, if you saw my private chat.
I did. I have it queued up, ready to go. So
perfect.
Let's
and if you can expand it to full screen when you do start it, that would be great, and put it about 80% volume. But this ties directly into what you were just sharing with everyone, and then I have some not so bright stuff to share with you afterward with regard to legislation that I discovered in my research. And I was going to share the data of all the frequencies that we have been detecting in our recent scanning clinics around the United States. So if you could play that, it'd be perfect.
Yeah. Okay. And it already is basically at full screen. So let's just play this here.
Imagine a world where tiny machines can cure cancer. Yes, I am talking about nanobots. And these nanobots has the potential to change your life. It can cure any diseases, or it can make you a superhuman. But with great power comes great responsibility. And we cannot deny that it can be misused. What if they malfunction or hacked, or used as a weapon? But we must balance them with the risks. As we explore this world of nanobot technology, we must constantly evaluate its impact on society. Only then can we fully unlock the potential of nanobots.
Last 30 years by people like Eric Drexler and Robert Freitas and Ray Kurzweil. Today I'm going to show you that these robots exist here in Israel. And I'll show you this syringe, which I brought from my lab. So this syringe has inside it 1,000 billion robots. So these robots are each 50 nanometers long, which as you can see in this slide under the microscope. 50 nanometers is about 2,000 times thinner than the thickness of your hair. Okay, and these robots were born actually 3 years ago in a research I did with Sean Douglas, now a UCSF professor. But over the past year and a half, in my group at Bar-Ilan University, we've been developing and testing robots for a variety of medical and therapeutic tasks. So we might not need even new drugs. We have amazing drugs already. We just don't know how to control them. This is the problem. And our nanobots hopefully solve this problem, and I'll show you how. So there's an interesting question. How do we build a robot or a machine the size of a molecule? So the simple answer would be, we can use molecules to build this machine. So we're using molecules, but we're not using just any molecule. We're using the perfect, most beautiful molecule on Earth, at least in my opinion, which is DNA. And in fact, every part of the robot, every part of our nanorobots, moving parts, axes, locks, chassis, software, everything is made from DNA molecules. And the technology that enables us to do this originated 30 years ago in the pioneering works of Adrian Seaman, culminating 7 years ago in the works of Paul Rothman from Caltech, which was also featured in TED. And it's called DNA origami. Now in DNA origami, we do not use a piece of paper, we use a single long strand of DNA. And we fold it into virtually any shape we want. For example, these shapes. So these are actual microscopic images of shapes the size of molecules that were folded from DNA. So the smileys you see here in center screen, for example, are 100 nanometers in size. And we make billions of them in a tube in a single reaction. Now, since 2006, several researchers, very talented ones, have been expanding the limits of the technically feasible in DNA origami. And now we have an astonishing array of shapes and objects which we can build using this technique. And these researchers also gave us computer-aided design tools that enable everyone very, very simply to design objects from DNA. So these CAD tools amazingly enable us to focus on the shape we want, forgetting the fact that these structures are in fact assemblies of molecules. So this is, for example, a shape. The computer can actually turn it into DNA molecules. And the output of this CAD software, as you can see, is a spreadsheet with fragments of DNA, which you can attach to a message and send to a company, one of 24 companies that make DNA by order, and you'll get those DNAs several days later to your doorstep. And when you get them, all you need to do is just mix them in a certain way, and these molecular bricks will self-assemble into millions of copies of the very structure that you designed using that CAD software, which is free, by the way. You can download it for free. So let's have a look at our nanorobots. So this is how the nanorobot looks like. It's built from DNA, as you can see, and it resembles a clamshell in which you can put cargo. You can load anything you want, starting from small molecules, drugs, proteins, enzymes, even nanoparticles. Virtually any function that molecules can carry out can be loaded into the nanobot, and the nanobot can be programmed to turn on and off these functions at certain places and at certain times. This is how it controls molecules. And so this particular nanorobot is in an off state. It's closed. It securely sequesters anything you put, any payload you put inside, so it's not accessible to the outside of the robot. For example, it cannot engage target cells or target tissues. But we can program the nanobot to switch to an on state based on molecular cues it finds from the environment. So programming the robot is virtually like assembling a combination lock, using disks that recognize digits. But of course, instead of digits, we're assembling disks that recognize molecules. So these robots can turn from off to on, and when they do, any cargo inside is now accessible. It can attack target cells or target tissues or other robots, which you'll see later on. And so we have robots that can switch from off to on and off again. We can control their kinetics of transition. We can control which payload becomes accessible at which time point. So these are nanorobots. And to another topic, organisms in nature, like bacteria and animals, have learned very early in evolution that working in a coordinated group conveys advantage and capabilities beyond those of the individual. And since we are interested in very complex medical procedures and very complex therapeutic settings, we're wondering what could we do if we could engineer artificial swarm behaviors into our nanobots as well. So we have extraordinarily large groups of nanobots. Can we teach them to behave like animals, like insects? And how do you do this? So the question is interesting. So you could think one way to do it would be to look at a natural swarm, like this swarm of fish, and simulate the dynamics of the entire swarm, and then try to write the codes in molecules, of course, that mimic the same behavior. This is virtually impossible. It's impractical. What we do is we take a single fish or a single nanobot, in our case, and you design a very basic set of interaction rules. And then you take this nanobot, you make 1 billion copies of it, and you let the behaviors emerge from that group. Let me show you some examples of the things we can already do. For example, just as ants can shake hands and form physical bridges between two trees or two remote parts of the same tree, we already have nanorobots that can reach out for each other, touch each other, and shake hands in such a way that forms physical bridges. Now you can imagine these robots making bridges extending from one half to the other half of an injured tissue, an injured spinal cord, for example, or an injured leg in the case of Dana, my daughter. And once they stretch over that tissue gap, they can apply growth factors as payloads. And those growth factors stimulate the regrowth and guide the regrowth of cells across the gap. So we already did that. And we have robots that can cross-regulate each other, just like animals do in groups. So, and this is amazing because, as you can see here, if you have two types of robots, type A and type B, they can cross-regulate each other such that A is active while B is not, and vice versa. So this is good for combination therapy. In combination therapy, we take multiple drugs, right? And sometimes two or more of these drugs can collide and generate side effects. But here, you can put one drug here and one drug here, and the robots will time the activity so that one drug is active, the other is not, and then they can switch. And so two or more drugs can operate at the same time without actually colliding. Another example that we did is quorum sensing. Now, quorum sensing is great. It's a bacterial-inspired behavior. It means nanorobots that can count themselves, and they can switch to on only when reaching a certain population size. This is a mechanism invented by bacteria in evolution, and they regulate amazing behaviors based on just their population density. For example, bioluminescence. This is one of the well-studied examples. So our robots can count themselves and switch to on only when reaching a certain population size, which we can program. And this is great because this is a mechanism of programming a drug to become active only when reaching a certain dose around the target, regardless of its inherent dose-response curve. One last thing I'm going to show to you is computing. So these nanobots can do computing. How so? If you think about your computer at home, the processor of the computer is in fact a gigantic swarm of transistors. In an i7 core, for example, you have 800 million transistors approximately, and they're set to interact in certain ways to produce logic gates. And these logic gates are set to interact to produce computations. So we can also produce computation by setting interaction between nanorobots to emulate logic gates, like you see here. And they form chains and they form pairs. And my team in Beltran University already developed several architectures of computing based on interacting nanorobots. And to prototype these, we're using animals, very interesting animals. These are cockroaches. They're very easy to work with. They're very sweet. They're actually from South America. And I'm South American myself, so I feel kind of related. And so what we do is we inject those robots into the cockroach. And to do that, of course, we have to put the cockroach to sleep. Have you ever tried putting a cockroach to sleep? We put them in a freezer for 7 minutes, and they fall asleep. And we can inject those nanorobots inside, and after 20 minutes, they start running around, they're happy. And those robots, while they're doing this, the robots read molecules from the cockroach as inputs, and they write their outputs in the form of drugs activated on the cockroach cell. So we can see that. And we already have, as you can see, architectures of interacting nanorobots that can emulate logical operators. And you can use this as modular parts to build any type of universal computer you want that can control. We already have systems that can control multiple drugs simultaneously as a result of biocomputing. This is real universal computing in a living animal. Now, we already have systems that have computing capacity of an 8-bit computer like Commodore 64. To make sure we don't lose control over the nanorobots after they're injected, my team developed nanorobots that carry antennae. These antennae are made from metal nanoparticles. Now, the antenna enabled the nanobots to respond to externally applied electromagnetic fields. So these versions of nanobots can actually be activated with the press of a button on a joystick. Or, for example, using a controller such as the Xbox or Wii, if you ever had the chance to play with those. And you can see one of my students in the lab configuring an Xbox app to control nanobots. For example, you can imagine nanorobots being injected to Dana, my daughter, for example, and the doctor can guide those robots into the site, into the leg, and just activate them with a hand gesture. And you can already see an example where we actually took cancer cells and loaded robots with cancer drugs and activated the drug by a hand gesture. And we can actually kill cancer cells just by doing this, which as you can see here. And the interesting thing is that because the controller, like the Xbox, is connected to the internet, the controller actually links those nanobots to the network. So they have an actual IP address, and they can be accessed from a remote device sitting on the same network. For example, my doctor's smartphone. So just by controlling the controller, this can be done.
Today, it's for a very special reason. 4 weeks ago, I don't know whether you saw the video released by the WHO, where they proclaimed that it was their intent to introduce mRNA vaccines for all vaccinations on Earth, and then go from there to treatment of all other diseases, including cancer, etc. What people do not understand is that all mRNA vaccines are dangerous and are going to threaten life. It does not matter whether the vaccine encodes for the spike protein, for the measles protein, for rubella, for the flu. It does not matter at all. Why? Because the whole danger of the vaccine stems from the ability of the immune system to recognize non-self. This cannot be allowed to happen. Even if the WHO says so, don't. And remember, this is the last thing I want to say, the WHO is a private club, like a private football club. A club that is being financed, has been financed at the top by what? Bill Gates. Bill Gates is now number 2. Who's the top financier? Germany. The German taxpayers are financing the WHO and enforcing mRNA vaccination. You can't do this. You can't let your children be vaccinated because they are changing mankind. All your personality is going to be changed. Your brain is being changed. And your heart is being weakened. Every injected mRNA vaccine is going to cause severe damage in our body and must be forbidden. Thank you.
So they're actually finding this in the xylocaine derivative. And if you compare the slides there, what Dr. Chalet was showing and what they're finding today. And in 2016, President Obama signed into the law the 21st Century Cures Act. And under the guise of the opioid epidemic in Section 3024 is going to shock everyone. Dr. Chalet shared with everyone, and you can go ahead and close that.
Right.
And remember, he was doing that presentation in Israel in 2013. And during that, he says, within 4 to 6 years that they should be using it in humans. And if you do the timing of that, I think when was the pandemic? It was relatively around that time. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to go over what the Cures Act is about. And I'll show you very specifically the language and Section 3024, which is, I'm on my entire screen. Share.
Okay.
And I'm assuming you can see me.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. So, by the way, the reason how I stumbled upon this is there were a lot of naysayers about that IBM document that was submitted and found during discovery in the Dawn DeVore case, who was the Department of Corrections nurse, where she was non-consensually implanted and she had surgical removal of several biosensors in her. And the Department of Defense and the government agencies that she was suing try to use the Cures Act as their defense to dismiss the case. And under Section 3024 of the 21st Century Cures Act, Public Law 114-255 was signed into law in December of 2016 under President Obama, by the way. And it was actually codified on January 22nd of 2024 that not only gave government protections to the agencies who were doing research or working on projects for the Department of Defense of the government, but it also gave private entities the same protections. And what I'll show next is the actual law itself. This is the Cures Act. It's the 21st Century Cures Act. Now, this is what they did. They snuck this law into place under the guise of the opioid abuse epidemic. And This bill provides funding for the National Institute of Health innovation projects, which include Precision Medicine Initiative and the Brain Initiative, which was very big under the Obama era. The NIH must submit a work plan to Congress that describes and justifies the projects. But basically, it's giving a huge amount of power to the FDA, HHS, and all of these agencies to, believe it or not, non-consensually experiment on American citizens, and it's completely legal under Section 3024. Clinical testing of investigational medical devices and drugs no longer requires the informed consent of the subjects if the testing poses no more than minimal risk to subjects and includes safeguards. So my curiosity really piqued.
How do they determine what minimal effects or minimal risk is?
That was exactly it. And so I was like, well, what is defined as minimal risk? And who decides what minimal risk is? And basically, it's up in the air. You have these agencies who define what minimal risk is, but here's the big caveat about this and what could possibly go wrong. Is that they now say that if you're using the Cures Act and you're being able to function under the Cures Act to do experimentation, that the data that is obtained through this non-consensual experimentation is protected and it makes it property. It's defined and protected under national security lass.
Of course.
So when you try to sue, correct. So when you try to sue or attempt to be made whole, the case is just automatically stalled because you can't you can't argue against who you're going after because they claim that they're protected under this law.
Sure.
And so I said, well, okay, then that puts us in a predicament because of what we do with Cosmic Clarity Connections and what we're investigating is basically non-consensual experimentation utilizing these implants. And bear in mind, let's just assume minimal risk means it's not going to cause any harm. Now, we've been covering this topic since 2010 officially. Non-officially earlier than that. And many people have lost their lives under this type of experimentation and committed suicide.
Yes.
So I would argue that the threshold for minimum risk has been far exceeded. Not only are you having people lose their lives, it's getting people committed, because if you listen to Colonel Egren's testimony, this phenomenon is made to make a person feel and look like they're crazy. So how many people have been committed and they've actually undergone this type of experimentation?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I would argue that far exceeds the minimal risk rule if we assume that minimal risk means to cause no harm. Okay. And so I said, well, what about the people who were implanted prior to 2016? Do they have a leg to stand on as far as pursuing any type of retribution? And to my surprise, and this is going to shock everyone, that this has been legal since 1982 under the rule of law. And the rule of law is just a concept between these organizations. And it gave the FDA massive powers to non-consensually experiment on each and every one of you Americans out there who are watching this program right now. I thought I was going to have a little bit more time to really go in depth, but let's look at some of the things that have gone wrong under this rule of law. If we look at the types of covert human experimentation that has happened, we can look at the Tuskegee syphilis study done in 1932 to 1972 in USA. U.S. Public Health, they basically gave African American males syphilis without informing them of their condition and offering treatment. And they just wanted to see and let it proliferate to see what would happen. And this was even after penicillin had become into existence. Obviously, a lot of people are familiar with Project MK Ultra, where the CIA mind control programs involved drugs like LSD, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, often on unwitting subjects. And this was justified by the Cold War, security needs. Then the radiation experiments involved exposing civilians, soldiers, and hospital patients to radioactive substances, often framed as therapeutic, and victims were not told that this was being done to them. The Guatemala STD experiments, we can go on and on. The Operation Sea Spray, where they released basically bacteria over San Francisco to test biological warfare efforts and dispersal and to see what that would do. Then you have Operation Midnight Climax. This was a sub-project of MK Ultra involving prostitutes hired to lure men to CIA-run safe houses where they were dosed with LSD and observed through one-way mirrors. This was conducted without consent. The Willowbrook hepatitis experiments. They took disabled children who were mentally ill or mentally disabled, and they intentionally infected them with hepatitis to study the disease. Canadian MK Ultra experiments, which basically falls under MK Ultra. Nerve agent trials, the Japanese, what they did to POWs. And then Russian psychiatric experiments. I mean, we can go on and on. So my question is to everyone out there, how does that make you feel? To know that it's legal for them, our government currently, and governments across North America and throughout the world, to basically invade your body without your consent.
Well, and what you do as evidence of it, you're finding people that have had horrible things done to them.
And then lie about it. Not only lie about it, but then gaslight the people that are under the experimentation and say that they're crazy when in fact they're not, and torture them even further.
Exactly. And we have literally thousands and thousands of victims out there. So, this was disheartening to me, because I really thought and we still need to continue our work. It's very important to basically show people that there is evidence out there. There's a way of gathering evidence out there, and you really are not crazy if you're suffering from this phenomenon. Okay. But what do we do from here? I think now is a time and an opportunity, even though as disheartening as this information is, it's an opportunity to bring all of us together on one platform, on one fight. And what I am going to be doing from this point forward is working with an organized group of very talented people to start a petition. And it is going to be my mission to awaken every single American out there in the general population. Look, read this, because I've already started doing this. And I can tell you, particularly amongst the gray hair voters in my community, is when I show them this, they're in disbelief immediately, and then they're immediately on the phone calling their senators and
the reality is this could be you.
Correct. Not only you,
anyone
that your children, but the problem is it's already being acted upon you. Okay. These nanobots are found not only in the vaccines, they're being found in everything, and it's being marketed as something that's really, really cool. Do you want someone out there to be able to control these things that are inside of you with a joystick?
Yeah, little kill switch.
Yep. Just imagine. Yeah, you talk about the benefits of this, and greatly, technology, and I've said this before, is not innately good or bad. It's about the people who are in power of this technology. That's what makes this an issue. And so for those of you who are watching out there, I'm asking you, put on your boots, put on your tennis shoes, And we really need to address this, and it needs to be addressed immediately, because I think right now is a good opportunity. With RFK in there, what we can really test based on actions and behaviors when we bring this information to a forefront. If we can obtain a million signatures out there, and I think it's very possible with this particular topic, that speaks volumes. It's votes, okay? And votes are important. And that's what I would like to conclude this episode with.
All right. Well, we will continue to follow this. And Jesse, thanks once again for all the tremendous work you're doing. Folks, go to mindnexuslive.com to learn more. And Jesse will pick this up again in a couple of weeks. It's very frightening, but it's something that people need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
And everybody should write to RFK Jr. too. Not just your Congress.
Exactly.
Your Congress people are compromised. The big pharma and everybody else who's putting this stuff in the vaccines. These Congress people are being paid off. So you're contacting. Not that you shouldn't, but that it may not have the impact that contacting someone like him, who's trying to root this stuff out, might have. So they should get in touch with him as well. So Jesse, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.